Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, President Trump arrives in China for a meeting with Xi Jinping amid disputes over trade, Taiwan, and the Iran war.
We cannot change each other, but then we can probably find a way to coexist peacefully.
A court overturns the double murder conviction of Alex Murdaugh, whose case captured national attention.
And as Asian Americans remain the fastest growing demographic group in the U.S., why their history and the discrimination they've endured is so often overlooked.
It is that question that we have been wrestling with for much of the history of the American Republic, of who gets to be an American.
Major funding for the PBS News Hour has been provided by the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad. The John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. Friends of the NewsHour, including Nell, Martha, and Mary Minow, in honor of the life and legacy of their parents, Newton and Josephine Baskin Minow, and Julie and Robin Powell, through Fidelity Charitable. Art Collins and Sophia Shaw, through the Arthur D. Collins Jr. Foundation, and George D. Hanby III. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. President Trump is in Beijing tonight for a state visit to America's chief global competitor and increasingly its chief geopolitical rival.
Mr. Trump has long targeted China as an economic foe of the U.S. while cultivating a relationship with its president, Xi Jinping, the most powerful Chinese leader since Mao Zedong. As Nick Schifrin reports from Beijing, a host of global issues are on the table.
Tonight, for the first time in nearly a decade, an American president landed in China. Onto a red carpet and into a synchronized ceremony by a country seeking stability. But President Trump also arrives to a China confident and hosting an embattled American president at war with a Chinese ally. Iran survived 5 weeks of war and now maintains a chokehold over the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil and natural gas usually flows. To help open the strait and make a diplomatic deal, a senior U.S. official says that President Trump will, quote, pressure Xi Jinping to exert his influence over Iran. Beijing hosted Iran's foreign minister just last week and buys 90% of Iran's oil. But a separate senior U.S. official told PBS NewsHour it's unlikely that Xi Jinping will use leverage over Iran, a point shared by President Biden's Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia, Eli Ratner.
Even though China does have major stakes, it's going to maintain an arm's length distance so not to get sucked in to the crisis itself.
China could benefit from the U.S. fighting a Middle East war with no obvious end. But China is also the world's largest consumer of oil transported through the strait.
It's certainly to China's benefit to see the United States stuck in yet another quagmire in the Middle East, losing diplomatic strength and using up military power on the other side of the world. But the fact is that the energy crisis and the economic crisis emerging from the Strait of Hormuz has major implications for China.
Taiwan holds even greater implications. The Trump administration recently authorized the largest weapons sale ever to Taiwan and has teed up an even larger sale.
Do you think we should still be selling them weapons? The United States should
Well, I'm going to have that
weapons
discussion with President Xi. President Xi would like us not to, and I'll have that discussion.
That statement, despite 40 years of U.S. assurance to Taiwan, it will not consult the People's Republic of China on arms sales.
That is not something the United States should do. We should not be in the business of negotiating Taiwan arms sales packages with Beijing, and we should not be viewing America's relationship with Taiwan as somehow a part of the U.S.-China relationship.
China also wants the U.S. to change diplomatic language set in 1998 by President Clinton during a trip to Shanghai.
We don't support independence for Taiwan.
China wants President Trump to be more declarative, to say, quote, "We oppose independence for Taiwan."
The Taiwan question is the very core of China's core interests and the bedrock of the political foundation of China-U.S. relations.
China's Taiwan asks have sparked a letter from 8 bipartisan senators this week declaring to President Trump, "You can make clear to Beijing that as you seek to level the economic playing field, American support for Taiwan is not up for negotiation."
Well, there are some concerns that Trump may say things that undermine the U.S. policy toward Taiwan. What is actually most important is, again, what the United States does after. Does Trump, after this visit, return to the business of supporting Taiwan diplomatically and supporting Taiwan's defense and resilience?
Beyond the national security issues, much of the focus of this trip and deliverables from the summit are economic. President Trump arrives here with a delegation of prominent CEOs. The U.S. and China are discussing extending their trade truce, and they're considering launching a board of trade and investment alongside Chinese purchases of American products. That includes Boeing jets and agriculture, including American beef and American pork. And despite bipartisan concern that Chinese investments could pose national security threats, President Trump recently said the U.S. is open for business.
Because now if they want to come in and build a plant and hire you and hire your friends and your neighbors, that's great. I love that. Let China come in.
That provides an opening to an already confident Xi Jinping. Confident because as China expands its military and nuclear forces, it has withstood President Trump's tariffs and found its own leverage. China restricted the export of rare earths and rare earth magnets that the world needs for everything from electric vehicles to fighter jets.
The United States is going to need those export controls lifted. Outside of China, very little supply currently exists for many of these materials and magnets.
Gracelyn Boscarin is a mineral economist at the Center for Strategic International Studies. She says as part of last year's trade truce, China agreed to lift export restrictions, but it hasn't followed through.
Quite recently, a number of aerospace manufacturing companies here in the U.S. have raised the alarm that if imports from China don't increase, they may have to pause manufacturing. So even though the formal restrictions are on pause, the imports have not resumed to the levels that we'd like.
The U.S. has its own leverage. It restricts the export of the most advanced computer chips that China needs for AI. And the U.S. could re-raise tariffs as the Chinese economy faces headwinds. But the Chinese feel confident, as I discussed today with Henry Wang, the president of the Beijing think tank Center for China and Globalization.
This 2026 summit is so different with 2017 summit because at that time, China was not near peer status. And then China's GDP has gone up almost 70% of the U.S., and China become a leading power on the green transition. So I think in that aspect, China's achieved counter capability with the U.S. So as I said, there's a mutual assured deterrence now. So we have to really find a way to work together.
China does have leverage over Iran. Is it willing to use that leverage if President Trump asks for it? Or no, is it more interested in seeing this war continue?
No, I think it's not in the Chinese interest to see this war continue. China was, passively brought into this war, this kind of mediating process. China would certainly like to do more, but also depends how well U.S. treat China. If U.S. treat China as a friend, as an equal partner, as a workable partner, then they should give China some respect and should maybe look after China's core interests as well.
Core interest meaning Taiwan?
Yes, I think China is very concerned about Taiwan being supported by U.S. for the separatist and independent tendency. So that is really, I think, important that our friends in the U.S. has to understand. So I think, selling weapons to Taiwan, Trump is a businessman, he may want to proceed that. But I think, China's certainly against that. I mean, no matter what kind of weapon system Taiwan may have, it's compared with mainland, it's peanuts.
But how much is China willing to actually do when it comes to Iran? When the U.S. sanctions so-called teapot refineries that buy some of the Iranian oil, Beijing told the refineries not to listen to the U.S. sanctions, to oppose the sanctions. I mean, it seems to me that Beijing has resisted U.S. attempts to try and use its leverage over Iran.
Yeah, that's true. I think gone are the days that the long arms jurisdiction like the U.S. is act as international law. China is big enough not to follow the U.S. law.
What does Beijing want to achieve at this summit?
To assure the global community, okay, the two largest economy, two strongest leaders are meeting in Beijing. We cannot change each other, but then we can probably find a way to coexist peacefully. We need to work together as the two biggest country in this world.
And tomorrow's meeting will help determine whether the U.S. and China embrace collaboration over confrontation. For the PBS News Hour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
In the day's other headlines, the Senate voted to confirm Kevin Warsh as the new chair of the Federal Reserve.
The ayes are 54, the nays are 45. The nomination is confirmed.
The vote landed mostly along party lines and comes as the central bank faces a difficult economic environment and ongoing challenges to its historic independence. President Trump has been pushing the Fed to cut interest rates despite rising inflation. That included frequent criticism of outgoing chair Jerome Powell, who has said he plans to stay on the Fed's board after his term ends on Friday. The Trump administration is freezing some new Medicare enrollments as part of an effort to crack down on what it says is fraud in federal health programs. Vice President J.D. Vance announced the initiative today, warning that states could lose their funding if they don't cooperate.
If they do not aggressively prosecute Medicaid fraud, we are going to turn off the money that goes to these anti-fraud units. And I would say a couple.
Vance also announced a $1.3 billion deferral in Medicaid reimbursements to California over suspected fraud. California Governor Gavin Newsom's office pushed back, saying, quote, "We hate fraud, but that's not what this is." Newsom says the dispute involves a state program that provides home-based care to low-income and disabled residents, helping keep them out of more expensive nursing homes. In Louisiana, Republican state senators are pushing forward with a plan that would eliminate one of the state's two majority black districts. The proposed map could help the GOP pick up another seat in Congress in this year's midterms. It leaves one Democratic stronghold remaining, largely based around New Orleans, and follows a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that struck down the state's current House map. It was a topic of discussion on Capitol Hill today for Republican and Democratic leaders.
It's disgusting. And Republicans are doing it openly, in plain sight, targeting African American communities. This is who they are.
The ultimate election integrity concern is to ensure that you don't have an election on an unconstitutional map. And when the highest court in the land says your map is unconstitutional, you cannot proceed. You can't have an election on an unconstitutional map.
Also today, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp called lawmakers for a special session next month to redraw maps there. Georgia joins Tennessee, Alabama, and others in reassessing their maps after the U.S. Supreme Court last month gutted the landmark Voting Rights Act and said districts could not be drawn with consideration for race. Health officials in Spain and Italy say at least 17 people have tested negative for possible hantavirus infection. That means the current number of cases stemming from a cruise ship outbreak stands at 11, with 9 confirmed. Meantime, European health officials say a French patient is critically ill and is breathing with the help of an artificial lung. They also say the outbreak likely started with a single animal-to-human transmission, as is typical for such infections. Here in the U.S.,
good morning, everyone. It is my second day here at the National Quarantine Unit in Omaha, Nebraska, and I just wanted to give you a little tour of my room.
Travel blogger Jake Rosemarine gave the world a glimpse of life in his quarantine. He's one of 18 Americans who were brought back home. He's asymptomatic, but expects to spend more than 40 days in quarantine to be safe. In the UK today, King Charles laid out the government's legislative agenda as Prime Minister Keir Starmer fights for his political future. The king's ceremonial speech is steeped in tradition, but the words themselves are not written by the monarch. They're written by the government in power. This year's address focused on areas like energy policy, defense, and national security, but it's unclear whether Mr. Starmer will be able to see those priorities through. He's facing growing calls from within his own party to step down and a possible leadership challenge from his health secretary. But Starmer has said he's not leaving. In the Philippines, that country's Senate was thrown into chaos after apparent gunshots erupted inside the chamber during a live session in Manila.
Meron pa lang. Oh my God! Oh my God! May nagpapubok! Oh my God!
No injuries were reported. The incident came after a close ally of former President Rodrigo Duterte claimed police were moving to arrest him. Senator Ronald De La Rosa once led Duterte's brutal anti-drug crackdown, which rights groups say left thousands dead. De La Rosa and Duterte are both facing crimes against humanity charges before the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Duterte is already in custody there, awaiting trial. On Wall Street today, stocks ended mixed after another discouraging report on inflation. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gave back nearly 70 points, but the NASDAQ enjoyed a strong session, adding more than 300 points. The S&P 500 also ended higher on the day. Still to come on the NewsHour, a look at why much of Asian American history and the discrimination many have faced so often remains overlooked. Uganda's open-door refugee policy comes under increasing strain due to regional conflicts. And we remember the career and impact of Jason Collins, the NBA's first openly gay player.
This is the PBS News Hour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, headquarters of PBS News.
A murder conviction that gripped the nation and touched on power and privilege in the South is being tossed out. Former South Carolina prosecutor Alex Murdaugh was found guilty of killing his wife and son on their estate. But today, the state's Supreme Court threw out his double murder conviction. Our Lisa Desjardins has more.
In a unanimous opinion, the justices overturned Murdaugh's life sentence for the murders, pointing to shocking jury interference by a court clerk during the trial. Murdaugh was convicted of killing his wife Maggie and son Paul on a summer night in 2021 at their secluded family compound. He took the stand, insisting he was innocent, but had to acknowledge he lied about his initial claim that he was not at the murder scene, disproven by incredible cell phone video taken by his son shortly before his death. No murder weapon was found, but the jury deliberated just 3 hours before convicting him. State Attorney General Alan Wilson says he will hold another trial. Meantime, the disbarred lawyer, Murdaugh, will remain in prison where he is serving a separate decades-long sentence for stealing more than $12 million from his clients. No one knows this case better and what it means than Valerie Borline from the Wall Street Journal, the author of The Devil at His Elbow, Alex Murdaugh and the Fall of a Southern Dynasty. Valerie, this is a dramatic decision, but is it surprising?
Well, you know, Lisa, there have been so many surprising moments in this case, but yes, there is another one. It is surprising. I think in a couple regards, it was a unanimous decision by a Supreme Court. That just sends a message that it was not even a close call, that they felt like the behavior of the clerk of court, I think they said it was breathtaking and disgraceful, and was enough in spite of all of Alex's many misdeeds. And they called out the judge and the lawyers for running a good proceeding. But they just felt like her errors were so egregious that they had no choice but to grant him a new trial. So yes, it is surprising to be where we are.
Let's talk about that clerk, Becky Hill. You interviewed her at length before the book in the past. At one point, she was going to write a book, but can you spell out exactly what she did here?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Walterboro, South Carolina, where the trial was held, is a really small town, about 5,000 people. And Becky knew many of the jurors, and she did write a book. It was later pulled from publication. She acknowledged plagiarizing some parts of it, but it caused additional problems for her because there were some members of the jury who took umbrage at some of the things they said. And I think partly is how we got here. There were jurors who said, well, that's not how it happened. And they wanted to set the record straight in some regards.
In terms of the accusation that she tampered with the jury in favor of conviction, what exactly did she do?
Well, you know, there was a real there was a real question in the mind of these justices. I went down in February for a long hearing where they kind of aired their concerns about the case. And their chief concern were Becky's errors harmless? Did she say a few things offhandedly to the jurors in passing, and they didn't change their view? Or were they is it so egregious for a member of the court to speak to jurors in a proceeding like that? Is that just a structural error that can't be denied? But what they agreed in their filing that she did do, according to the jurors that were interviewed by the courts, she talked to them, a couple of them, around the time that Alex Murdaugh took the stand. You referenced it, this kind of bombshell 2 days on the stand where he told his version of events and said things. The jurors said that Ms. Hill said things like, don't listen to what he said, watch his actions, or be careful as he testifies, things like that. But the justices just felt like, there's no remedy except for a new trial if someone, and they said, places their finger on the scales of justice. And they further said, justice is supposed to be blind and court officials are supposed to be mute.
So we return to this ecosystem that really was that incredible trial. Is there going to be a new trial? The Attorney General says yes, but his term is up in January. He's running for governor. Do you think the next Attorney General and the state will, in fact, have a new trial?
Yes, and the Attorney General Alan Wilson wasted no time in saying today that he would try him again. And credit where credit is due. There's an outlet in South Carolina called Fitz News, and they surveyed a week or so ago all the candidates, the 4 candidates who are running for Attorney General, and to a person they said they would retry him. The question is where? Dick Harpootlian told me some weeks ago that if the head defense lawyer, if they got a new trial, they would request a change of venue. So we're not exactly sure in the state where that might happen and when. There's a desire, I think, on both sides for a speedy trial. But what does that mean here, kind of halfway through 2026? It would be difficult to find a term of court for a couple weeks or however long they might need this calendar year, even early into next year. So it's not clear when and where that trial might take place.
Now, so much has changed, including that the location of the murders was sold and that scene itself was destroyed. Is this going to be much harder to prosecute now that so much time has gone by?
Well, I think a lot of things have changed. Moselle, the property where Maggie Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh were killed, has been sold and broken up kind of into pieces. There's some question. Dick Harpootlian mentioned to me that there would be real questions about whether Alex Murdaugh might take the stand again. And the justices in their ruling, it was about 20 pages what they had to say. And they had said a couple of things about all that financial evidence that we heard of the millions of dollars he stole from, he pleaded guilty to stealing from the least of these, his personal injury clients. There was some warning from the justices about treading lightly there. There might be, just be careful how much of that comes in order not to prejudice a jury. So it'll be a different proceeding. And I think, and we all sense it every day, I think technology has changed so much. We may have access to some parts of the records that make a little different sense than they did at the time. So we'll see. But no, it's a different landscape for sure. And there wouldn't be that same kind of bombshell evidence that you referenced. The video on Paul Murdaugh's phone that was found fairly late in the game, proving that Alex was lying about where he was that night. So it'll be, I plan to be there every day for sure.
Violet, let me ask you the big question. For those who may not have paid attention, why do you think this case has generated so much thought?
Well, we have to remember this, it was a six-week trial in 2023, by far the most streamed court proceeding in this country ever. There was something so kind of baroque about it. But I really also think a couple things. There's this duality between the family that looks so perfect on paper, right? This beautiful clothing, furs, property, smiling family. And then what was going on underneath the surface, there were so many secrets. And I also think we're really drawn to the South, the rural South, the deep South where this happened. There's something about the South that just evokes this picture in our minds. And I think the setting was a big part of this too, for sure.
Valerie Borline, author of The Devil at His Elbow. We will keep watching along with you.
Thanks so much for having me.
President Trump's visit to China is a reminder of the long intertwined history between the two countries. Asian Americans are the fastest growing demographic group in the United States. Yet across 250 years of American history, their stories and the discrimination they faced have often been overlooked. Tonight, Judy Woodruff looks at how that past continues to shape the question of who belongs in America. It's part of her series, America at a Crossroads.
In the early morning light, Manhattan's Chinatown is already in motion. Vendors unpack for the day, children head to school, and in Seward Park, Tai Chi warm-ups, slow and steady. But this neighborhood also holds a darker story of arrival, exclusion, and resistance.
This is kind of where Chinatown in New York City really got its start.
I met up with journalist and author Michael Luo, whose latest book, Strangers in the Land, traces that history across the United States, beginning in California.
As the hostility towards the Chinese got worse and worse on the West Coast, they started to come east, and they ended up here on Mott Street. And the story of Chinatowns in the United States is a story of exclusion, because these were essentially ethnic ghettos where people were just kind of clustered together in this Chinese quarter.
To stay safe.
Yeah.
But for Luo, the son of Taiwanese immigrants and now an executive editor at The New Yorker, the story began far from Chinatown with a confrontation with a stranger on Manhattan's Upper East Side in 2016.
She turned and said, "Go back to China." And so I, with the adrenaline flowing, trying to think of something smart to say in response, I yell, "I was born in this country." And it just felt so pathetic.
Luo sees his own personal experience growing out of a much deeper pattern in the country, one that was tested time and time again.
It is that question that we have been wrestling with for much of the history of the American Republic, of who gets to be an American.
We sat down inside Cooper Union's Great Hall, a stage for American debate for more than a century.
At one point, I think you said the precarity of the Asian American experiences.
Precarity, I think, is a good word, because it might be easy for some Asian Americans to feel like, oh, you know, we are in these rooms and we are successful and that kind of thing. But if there's some sort of shock to the system, like COVID, like an economic downturn, that precarity is revealed. And we've seen throughout American history the way that happens. An extraordinary place that preserves this history.
Luo took us to the Museum of Chinese in America, which highlights that history, including the massive influx of Chinese laborers during the gold rush. After that faded, many went on to help build the Transcontinental Railroad, segregated from white workers and paid far less.
This is a famous photo because there are no Chinese in it.
Even though they played an enormous role.
Yes.
That gap between contribution and belonging kept widening, and by the 1870s, economic fear and political division were growing.
That is when you start to see just, legions of unemployed, underemployed, white working men, as they called them. And also, I think the country was really politically polarized. It sounds familiar. This all sounds very familiar. Both the Republicans and Democrats, and remember, the Republicans were the party of Lincoln, freed the slaves, stood for equality and all these, great ideals. They became just as ugly and vociferous in their rhetoric about the Chinese as the Democrats. And the reason is because they were trying to win the votes on the West Coast, and so they needed California, Washington, Oregon, these young states that had a heavy influence of Chinese arrivals, and there was a growing hostility there.
That backlash led to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first U.S. law to bar entry to the United States based explicitly on race and nationality.
Nearly 200 communities in the American West expelled the Chinese from their communities, in many cases violently. And historians call this period the driving out. But the Chinese were still coming in, and communities were upset, and they took matters into their own hands.
In 1871, a mass lynching in Los Angeles killed at least 17 Chinese immigrants. 14 years later, another attack in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Anti-Chinese policies intensified. The 1892 Geary Act forced Chinese residents to register and carry papers or face deportation. On the West Coast, many were detained at Angel Island.
This is a photograph of an interrogation. And so you would come in, get off the boat, you would be sent to Angel Island, and they'd be interrogating you about your story. And so
he looks young. It's
yeah,
a young man,
yeah,
maybe
yeah,
even
as a boy.
teenager.
Yeah.
During his research, Luo found a notebook from a sheriff
It's almost like mugshots.
tracking Chinese residents.
It's like a record of surveillance, which is, really haunting. And so,
creepy.
So some of these things, like gone to China for good, 1900, went to China, and then you start to see this one. You see this one. It says dead. When you look into their faces, like you're just kind of curious who they are, what their stories are.
As restrictions grew, so did the resistance, like here at Cooper Union, where Chinese activists gathered in 1892 to protest, led by Wang Chin-fu.
It's kind of extraordinary.
We found a signature from the civil rights organization he co-founded, hidden deep within the archives.
You come down to September 22nd, and it says Chinese Equal Rights League.
Other Chinese community leaders ordered people to refuse registration. It was also during this period that the nationality of San Francisco-born Wong Kim Ark was challenged.
Everybody in this country get due process and equal protection.
Leading to the landmark Supreme Court ruling on birthright citizenship that is again being tested in the courts today. For Luo, all this history reveals a consistent thread.
Difference is hard, I think, in our personal lives, I think, in our companies, in our churches, in our schools. And so I think just human nature, I think this is why this kind of experiment that was happening in California, this multiracial experiment, really was a test for us as a country. And we didn't do particularly well in it.
In San Francisco,
the exclusion era lasted 83 years. Restrictions eased slightly during World War II, but full immigration equality didn't come until 1965, when President Lyndon Johnson signed the Immigration and Nationality Act here in New York at the feet of the Statue of Liberty. That change helped drive a new wave of migration, including Luo's own parents. Today, the United States is home to the largest Chinese diaspora outside of Asia.
This is not just the story of the Chinese in America, it's the story of any number of immigrant groups who have been treated as strangers.
Is the United States held to a higher standard than other countries?
I think we should be, perhaps. When you look at our founding documents, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. America has always been a place driven by that. The idea of America. We've stood for these ideals, and so maybe we should be judged by our higher standard.
For the PBS News Hour, I'm Judy Woodruff in New York City.
The ongoing conflict in the Middle East has drawn attention away from other devastating wars around the world, including in Sudan, where millions of civilians have been displaced and many forced to flee to neighboring countries. The crisis comes as many donor nations sharply reduce refugee assistance, leaving humanitarian agencies scrambling to adapt. Special correspondent Fred DeSam Lazaro reports now from Uganda, long one of the region's leading destinations for refugees.
In a world that seems ambivalent, even hostile toward refugees, Uganda stands apart.
$100.
Patrick Okello is Commissioner of Refugee Affairs, overseeing what he readily calls an open-door policy.
This is a very small number. Today has been a good day.
Every morning, just outside his Kampala offices, hundreds of recent arrivals gather, on this day most from Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. The vast majority are approved for asylum.
In terms of rejection, it's about 2%, which is the lowest number anywhere in the East African region and even in the world.
We traveled to Kiryandongo, about 3 hours from Uganda's capital, where tens of thousands of refugees have settled and where hundreds continue to arrive every week. Uganda has perhaps the world's most liberal refugee policy, and over the recent decades, up to 2 million people fleeing conflict in surrounding countries have come here. They're given work permits, a small plot of land to cultivate, things to start life over. That's never been easy in a low-resource setting, but after cutbacks in international aid programs in the last couple of years, it's become exponentially more difficult, and the government's been forced to make some tough decisions. Refugees here have come mostly from South Sudan in recent years. That country, carved out of Sudan in 2011 after decades of brutal civil war, has been beset by internal conflict since. Then, about 3 years ago, Sudan itself became racked by violence, sending waves of Sudanese into a neighborhood now occupied mostly by their former South Sudanese antagonists. Beatrice Imani arrived here several years ago and settled into this home built with assistance from a non-government group and tends a small plot of land. This used to be yours. Then a chunk of it was recently taken from her, she says.
They told me they had a lot of Sudanese coming in, so I had to give them some of this land.
Food assistance she used to get in commodities and later cash, that too went away.
They said they are going to give us food again, but that has not happened. Maybe those people are taking all the support.
Resentment and conflict have arisen here, and even killings, driven as much by scarcity as old animosity, officials say.
The stability of the situation in the settlements is something that, is extremely worrying.
Jason Hepps heads the Uganda office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. UNHCR has for years provided support to the Ugandan government, but this year it's raised just 10% of the funds it says are needed here.
And so you have to triage.
Because they are new here, the Sudanese get priority, but they don't get much. 37-year-old Aisha Adan Musa, separated from her soldier husband, fled here from the Darfur region with 4 small children. Unlike arrivals in earlier years, there's no assistance to build her a sturdier home than this tent-like structure. She receives just under $75 in food assistance, which must stretch for 2 months.
I get some maize, yams, cooking oil. Sometimes I can buy tomatoes. I go to the market and around the neighborhood to collect clothes to wash so I can get something extra. I can make porridge with sugar for the kids.
Her children will not likely see a school anytime soon.
This year, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of children will it will be a lost year for them.
There's simply no money, he says, as most donor nations have reduced their assistance budgets. The U.S., by far the largest donor, cut its global humanitarian assistance to 1/3 of what it was 2 years ago. Hepps says healthcare funding has fallen through the floor.
We had about, all told, $30 million. That was 24. In 25, that was reduced to about 15, and this year we started the year with about $2 million.
At the Panyadoli Health Center, serving some 300,000 people in the area, the staff has been trimmed from 133 2 years ago to about 50 today, among them just 2 doctors.
I'm delivering 85 to 90 women per week.
One of them is Alex Dazita.
And 45 beds to accommodate these women.
And the rule you say is if you have a normal delivery, you're on the floor. If you have a C-section, you have first dibs on a bed.
Yes, to try to prevent complications, infections, and so on.
Caesarean sections are common among the Sudanese patients, he says, due to the practice of female genital cutting.
Out of 5, you will find that 3 are by C-section.
Wow. 3 out of 5.
Yes.
As we spoke, I had to quickly duck out of the way as the family of a patient just behind us sought the doctor's attention. The patient had just delivered and her blood pressure was spiking.
Let me first bring my gloves. Last year, I didn't lose a mother, but I've lost babies. I lost around 67 babies.
67 babies. How many of these would have been preventable if you had the amenities that you need?
Around 50 of them would be preventable.
He's worked to better the odds for babies, landing donations of incubators and improvising this contraption with 3 naked light bulbs, for example.
That was my phototherapy. For baby, we have jaundice, yellowing of the eyes and the skin.
For Billy Rubin. Overall, the survival rate of newborns here climbed from 90 to 96% between May 2024 and May 2025. Mothers and babies are just one part of the workload here. On any given day, there are hundreds of patients with HIV, TB, and malaria, with hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease. Dr. Tazita says he hasn't taken a vacation since at least 2024, and he's been awake most of the time. How many hours do you sleep?
A maximum of 3, sometimes 2. Yesterday, I left this place at 3.
You left this place at 3 a.m.? And woke up?
6:30, I was here.
In response to UN appeals, the United States recently announced a $2 billion grant for humanitarian assistance worldwide. The funds are to kick in later this year, with Uganda's share at $75 million.
That will cover a lot of the humanitarian immediate life-saving needs for health workers, for medicine, and what we were calling a bridge.
A bridge that will span only a part of a sea of humanitarian need, he says, in a region where conflict seems unrelenting.
Hosting refugees is a global shared responsibility. It should not be left entirely to Uganda alone. We've given land, but the refugees need shelter. We've given land, the refugees need food. We've given land, children have to go to school, children need health services. The women need to deliver children in decent hospital environment.
For the PBS News Hour, I'm Fred de Sam Lazaro in the Kiryandongo refugee settlement, Uganda.
A pioneer in the world of sports has died. Jason Collins was the first openly gay athlete to play in one of the 4 major American sports leagues. Today, tributes are pouring in for a man remembered as a beloved friend, a fierce competitor, and a tireless advocate for equality.
Number 46, Jason Collins.
He was a barrier-breaking basketball pro whose bravery inspired a generation.
Jason Collins becomes the first openly gay athlete to play in any of this country's 4 major professional sports.
Jason Collins, a 7-footer known for his hustle defense, played 13 seasons in the NBA for 6 different teams. But it was this 2013 essay he wrote for Sports Illustrated that made history, where he announced in the first 3 sentences, "I'm a 34-year-old NBA center. I'm black and I'm gay." The country was still 2 years away from legalizing gay marriage, and the revelation sent shockwaves through professional sports. Collins told ABC News that day he was at peace.
I think the country is ready for supporting an openly gay basketball player.
12 hours later, how does it feel?
It's incredible. You just try to live an honest, genuine life, and next thing you know, you have the president calling you. And,
what did he say?
He was incredibly supportive.
Despite that high-profile support in the macho world of the NBA, the reaction was mixed. Some responded with homophobia. Others, like Kobe Bryant, who just 2 years before had been fined by the league for using an anti-gay slur on the court, praised him, tweeting, "Proud of Jason Collins. Don't suffocate who you are because of the ignorance of others."
For Jason to come out in 2013, pre-marriage equality, we're talking about a hostile culture. It's easy for us to forget what we were like as a nation, but we were not kind, and the NBA was not kind.
Sports writer LZ Granderson covered Collins' career and was a friend.
He was a starting center for a team that was in the NBA Finals. You don't get to be the starting center of a team that good unless you are excellent at what you do. And Jason Collins was an excellent basketball player. The league was forced to confront its internal homophobia within its organization and say, there's no way we can justify keeping out a veteran player who has been excellent in his career and caused no problems without looking like we're homophobic.
After retirement in 2014, Collins became an ambassador for the NBA. Last night, NBA All-Star Jason Kidd, who played with and later coached Collins, called him a pioneer. He had courage like you've never seen, Kidd wrote. Those who knew him were blessed to call him a friend. You are already missed, my brother. Rest in power.
You know, I was blessed to be at his wedding, and the day before, I spent time with his uncle, who he has talked about before. His uncle came out first in the family and sort of took the brunt of the shock of it all for the family. And so when Jason came out, you know, he's remarked that it was a lot easier because of his uncle. We've come a long way as a nation, and Jason was a major step in that progress in terms of us coming a long way.
Collins announced last year he was undergoing treatment for stage 4 glioblastoma, an aggressive form of brain cancer. Granderson remembers his friend as much more than an athlete.
So in addition to being, you know, a true competitor in the highest sense and a professional in the highest sense, he was a wonderful friend. He was a wonderful brother, husband, son, uncle, and he was a wonderful friend. And I'm going to miss him a lot. The world is going to miss him a lot.
Collins tackled his diagnosis with the support of his friends and family and the same courage he'd shown in his career.
I'm unafraid to break through a wall or try to do everything possible. I think because I'm so surrounded by love. And I know that my family is so strong and they will be okay.
Jason Collins was 47 years old.
Even though half of the world's population will experience menopause, it's still a misunderstood phase of life, under-researched and rife with misinformation. On Horizons from PBS News, which airs as both a broadcast and a podcast, our William Brangham recently discussed why with two menopause practitioners.
Let's do a little bit of medical breakdown here. Menopause and perimenopause. Walk us through just some definitional understanding of what those two stages are.
Okay, well, menopause is a little bit easier to define because it does have a bright line, and that is the time at which either your ovaries stop functioning naturally as a result of age, or you may have had surgery, you may have had chemotherapy, things that prematurely plunge you into menopause. So that's easy. It also marks the end of your reproductive years. So that's menopause. Perimenopause is, I think, where people start to get confused because they kind of know what menopause is, but the phase beforehand, which can go on anywhere from 4 to 10 years before you get to menopause, is where the confusion lies. And I think that a lot of doctors don't understand that this is a years-long process that needs to be dealt with. A lot of the symptoms that we associate with menopause, such as hot flashes and mood swings and night sweats and sleeplessness, happen during perimenopause and oftentimes are worse doing perimenopause than after you.
Oh, interesting. So it can be more volatile.
Oh, yes. Yes, because what's happening, there are two different things going on hormonally. And when you're in perimenopause, it's not that your hormones are low and completely gone. They're fluctuating wildly, and that is having effects throughout your body, mentally, physically.
Hormonal roller coaster.
All of that hormonal change. So some days your hormones are too high, some days it's too low. And that is what you are constantly feeling sort of out of sorts because you're not in the normal balance that you would have been in your premenopausal years. And then once you get to menopause, and until you 4 to 10 years, well, how do you know how long it's going to be? You don't. Until
you don't get a telegram in the mail saying,
no one
bingo.
gives you an expiration date. And I think that the experience of menopause differs for different ethnicities. Black women in this country, even though we say that menopause average 4 to 7 years, for Black women that perimenopausal transition takes as long as 10 years. And it starts earlier, and their symptoms are more severe as they go through this transition. And yet they are the women who are least likely to have a discussion and to be prescribed hormones even when they're symptomatic.
I want to ask you, Dr. Stryker, about this, what I've come to learn is a sort of seminal moment in the treatment of menopause. And this was in the early 2000s, when a decade-long study that was being run by the NIH about the effects of hormone replacement therapy was suddenly stopped because the study's authors said, whoa, we have detected a signal of real health implications. I'm going to just put this graphic up and say, this was the Women's Health Initiative study, and it said, quote, long-term use increases the risk of breast cancer by 26%, stroke by 41%, and heart attacks by 29%. I know you were both treating women back at the time.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what the impact of that, we'll talk about the study in a moment, but the impact of that study must have been like a thunderclap.
It was, I called it the flush that was heard around the world, because every single woman took her hormone therapy, flushed it down the toilet, and not only were they terrified, they were angry. They were angry that I have been sold a bill of goods. And quite frankly, first of all, I just want to be very clear. The study was an excellent study. A lot of people say, oh, that study was a flawed study, it was a bad study. It was a very good study. The problem is that the women in the study were not reflective of most women when they're going through perimenopause and menopause today. 70% of the women in that study were over the age of 60. Completely different population. They were given a form of hormone therapy that we do not routinely use today. And it was the progestogen, the synthetic progesterone, that was actually the culprit in terms of increasing the risk of breast cancer. It was not the estrogen, the conjugated equine estrogens, which we know actually is protective when it comes to the breast. The biggest issue, though, is your folks. It was the media. The media completely misrepresented the data. That was frightening, both to women and to physicians, quite frankly, who did not read it correctly and analyze it. And the truth of the matter is the study was actually reassuring. 98% of the women in this study did very, very well. And once we realized that it was really the progestogen that was the culprit, and change that out to do something else, estrogen therapy, hormone therapy is very, very safe. But unlike any other study, I think, that we've ever dealt with in our lifetime, in our careers as physicians, it just doesn't go away. The repercussions of this keep on going on and on and on, and we're still explaining it away today.
You can watch that episode of Horizons on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in for new episodes every weekend on your local PBS station.
Meanwhile, the 6th season of the podcast On Our Minds is out now. It's brought to you by the teens in PBS News' Student Reporting Labs, which is our high school journalism training program.
And this season marks America's 250th anniversary by exploring what it's like to be young in every corner of the country.
On Our Minds is a teen life podcast produced by us, for us.
With PBS News Student Reporting Labs. We're your hosts, Zach from Southern California.
And Helena from North Carolina. This year, we're taking you on an audio road trip.
Indiana is full of stories.
Minneapolis is anything but ordinary.
Driving through Winter Park, I remembered a part of me that had been lost to time.
So you started dancing,
pretending we could play along with the sculptures.
You'll hear stories from young people all across the country.
So buckle up and hop in.
Because you're coming with us on the On Our Minds road trip.
And you can find the On Our Minds series anywhere you get your podcasts. Meanwhile, that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. Funding for America at a Crossroads was provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.